Welcome back to China Remix, the show that unpacks China's youth culture and its surprising intersections with the world, brought to you by Asia Society Policy Institute's Center for China Analysis. I am Lizzie Lee, your host, and after a little bit of a hiatus, I'm here again with my co-host, Barkley. Barkley, we miss you. Thank you so much for being here with us, and tell us what you've been up to.
Yeah, I missed you too, Lizzie. I've actually been in India for a while. Just got back last week. And yeah, I mean, it was interesting. There are lots of parallels, obviously, between India and China that I could see. I was in Delhi for most of my trip, and I must say it was very smoggy. So it kind of reminded me a bit of Beijing in 2014. There's also, my favorite topic, youth unemployment. There's a really high rate of youth unemployment in India. So there's definitely some parallels there. But the biggest parallel, of course, relevant for us today is India banned TikTok in 2020. And I know that's obviously what we're going to be talking about.
Fascinating. Your trip tied a lot of threads together, right? Climate change, youth unemployment struggles, and TikTok, which we'll be talking about today. We see China and India, two countries, obviously, with two opposite population problems, but seem to share the issue of finding meaningful work for the young people. And we'll save that for another episode. Maybe dive into how youth unemployment looks so different in India and China. But for today, I wanted to pick your brain about something wild that has been unfolding over the past few weeks, right? The TikTok ban here in the US, the app's brief shutdown, and this bizarre migration of users to a Chinese app called RedNote or 小红书. So, Barkley, let's start with TikTok. Can you sort of break down what makes this app so controversial yet so beloved, especially among Gen Z, the young people?
So sure. Well, I think we have to remember that TikTok originally was an app called Douyin. And so it's a Chinese app. It's run by a Chinese company called ByteDance. And it became incredibly popular around the world, particularly in America, where I think it has about 170 million users, which is roughly half of the population is on TikTok. And I think, there are many reasons for why TikTok struck a nerve. I think one of the main ones is that it sort of put content over individuals. So if you think of the way that the algorithm and the feed are the locus of attention on TikTok, that's quite different to the previous generation of major Western social media platforms like Meta, X, or Instagram, where you follow particular people. And of course, the algorithm is really impressive. I don't know how many videos I've seen of people saying TikTok knew I was gay or bisexual before I did, which maybe is a reflection of my own algorithm. But TikTok was also participatory. So the app was constantly inviting users to respond to what they saw on their feed, meaning memes, dances, trending sounds. They would all go viral in a way that wasn't really possible before. So it was a really exciting place to be. And obviously, that's why it became so incredibly popular.
Right. And just to, second you on the algorithm part, sometimes it's almost scary. Seems like a mirror reflecting my own interest and staring back at me, so to speak. But TikTok's ownership by the Chinese company ByteDance, as you mentioned, has drawn extensive scrutiny, especially from the US government. US officials argue that its ties to China make it a national security risk. There's fear that user data or even the algorithm itself could be weaponized by Beijing. So far, the company has denied those allegations, but the optics are enough to spark heated debate, especially here in the US. And that brings us to the ban. The government's case sounds pretty dramatic, at least at first glance, right? Fears of espionage, disinformation campaign, and as one US senator puts it, it is the most powerful propaganda tool ever. So, Barkley, do you think there's a solid ground for that argument, or is it more about politics?
Yeah, I mean, let's break that argument down, right? So it's about national security. And I think there are two elements to that argument. The first argument is a sort of principle argument. It's should a foreign power have the keys to a powerful piece of media in the United States? And two, what happens to everyone's data? So let's break those down. So number one, you know, with this election, we have seen that if you own a social media application, it can powerfully change your political fortunes, right? Look at Elon Musk and X. So clearly, holding the keys to a megaphone in an era when a majority of people get their news and form their opinions about the world through social media is powerful. That is obvious. We can clearly see that. So that I think actually does lend some credence to the idea that you might be skeptical about an app that is owned by a Chinese company when we know that the CCP is able to exert influence over Chinese companies and that they're not really going to be able to say no to whatever the government asks of them. And then, there's the data point, right? So, um, there is an argument that this data could be used for a nefarious purpose. It could be used maybe to train big AI models because of the, big data, and that in aggregate, it could provide some kind of national security insight into American preferences, and obviously it might seem like a bit of a reach that dance videos and cat videos from America might be used for some kind of national security tool. But when you think about what the data represents in aggregate, maybe there is some argument. But when American senators have been questioned about specifically what they mean about the national security element here, they're always very vague, right? They always say, if you saw what we saw in our confidential briefings, well, those briefings remain confidential, so we don't know what's in them. And so it's hard for the public to gauge how much credence they should be lending to this and whether this is actually politics. And because these confidential briefings are not being made public because we don't know what the material is, and because people are feeling skeptical anyway, that leads them to react in ways that are probably not how the government expected.
Right. And it's hard for people to trust the process, so to speak, when so much is kept behind closed doors. And it goes for both sides of the debate, actually. So, talking about the shutdown, we know TikTok briefly went dark over one day or 12 hours in a weekend. And people just lost it. I saw people, literally throw funerals for the app in real world and online. But perhaps the most interesting part is RedNote, right? 小红书, this Chinese social media app that blends kind of lifestyle content, shopping hacks, personal blogs. It has been around for a while, actually, since 2013. But prior to this, 小红书never really had a moment in the English-speaking world. And then came this huge migration to 小红书. So Barkley, what is RedNote or 小红书, and why did it suddenly become the go-to for TikTok refugees?
Yeah, so RedNote or Xiaohongshu, it's a Chinese social media app. It is in some ways similar to Douyin. It's popular mainly amongst affluent urban women in China. Though the demographics have been getting more mixed in recent years. Uh, it's great for recipes, travel tips, and it's great especially for beauty routines, hence why its popularity amongst women. Its CEO actually is a Stanford graduate, so it has that kind of slightly more urbane, educated edge to it. And why this app in particular of all the Chinese social media apps, I wish I could say it was because of some incredible functionality that Xiaohongshu has that no one else has. But I think mainly it was because, unlike with Douyin, which is the Chinese TikTok, this was a Chinese app that you could easily register for with a foreign phone number. And once people realized that they could do that easily, they started flooding over.
As you mentioned, RedNote became this backup people flocked to when TikTok shut down. And I saw many influencers rally their followers to join RedNote. It was almost like a protest against the US tech giant. Like, well, if TikTok is gone, we're not going to Instagram. We're going to another Chinese app that's even more Chinese. And then something really fascinating happened. The RedNote influx wasn't just about recreating another version of TikTok. It became this unexpected cultural exchange, so to speak. So Barkley, there were a lot of viral and frankly poignant moments from the weekend. Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, it seems, the memes come and go very, very fast. So it's hard for me to keep up. And it seems like every day they change. But, as you said, this was a protest, right? This was a protest by TikTok users. And so many people arrived on the app saying things like, is my Chinese spy here? Where's my Chinese spy? Or nice to see you again. And this is clearly referencing the US government's argument that TikTok was a national security threat. Here they were completely satirizing that. Take my data, China. Like, I don't care. And then, as you said, people went deeper. I saw videos of high school students in the US showing their Chinese counterparts what their schools look like, and then also asking for help with their math homework. I saw Chinese people, showing off their cities, like the gleaming light shows in places like Chongqing and all the futuristic architecture some of these cities have. And then, the Chinese internet is a cutting place, and it can be very, very on the nose and edgy. And so there were some satirical posts, and one I really enjoyed was a US user who said, "Hey, like, make fun of America, like, tell it as it is." And a Chinese user responded, "Why do you guys eat like you have free healthcare?" Which I found very funny.
Right. And you know how supersized the American, especially American drinks can be. It was a cultural shock for me when I first came to the country. But I also love the conversations about cultural stereotypes, right? So I saw this American teenager, I think, asking if every Chinese family has a panda as a pet. And the Chinese users are like, yeah, and they're our laundry mate. They do our laundry every day. It's just so rare to see, humor disarm cultural stereotypes and cultural differences like that. And then, there were deeper conversations, as you mentioned, about, differences in LGBTQ rights, people's job struggles, and, the little painful or sweet moments of everyday life. Barkley, as a trained anthropologist, how would you capture this moment? Are there parallels to other cultural exchanges you've seen before?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is sort of the platonic ideal of what the internet was supposed to do, bring us all together and let us peer into the corners of the world we'd otherwise never see. And I think it did help that on both sides there's a strong political culture telling people to be wary of the other side, right? We've seen the politicization of America in China and vice versa, Trump's anti-China rhetoric. And so, ironically, this means that regular people are skeptical of those official narratives and they want to learn the truth. And so, this is a way for people to feel like they were able to do that, even for a brief moment. So, it's quite beautiful. And I think what you saw was this very real human exchange because very quickly they moved beyond the politics and it was what happens when you get sick in your country? What's healthcare like? What are your relationships like? I saw one funny post, which was a woman in China saying, "Do American men cheat like they do in China?" There was all of this kind of very prosaic human connection that was happening behind the politics.
Right. And to me, it's like an accidental digital agora. Frankly, reminds me of the early internet in the 2000s when, forums and chat rooms connected people across different cultures. But then there's the flip side on censorship. China's tight control over social media means certain topics are off limits. I actually find it surprising how RedNote users warn Americans about what not to post, just in case your accounts get shut down, right? Don't post about guns, don't post about nudity, don't talk about political sensitive issues, etc., etc. I think it's a really poignant and also painful reminder of how different these digital spaces, how split they are now. And that makes me wonder, how sustainable is this cultural exchange if it is so heavily policed and censored these days, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm interested to see how this plays out in the long term. Will RedNote have to spin off an international version of the app, or will they somehow find a way to let users enjoy a less censored experience while keeping everyone nominally on the same app? And actually, yesterday I was speaking to a friend who actually works at Xiaohongshu, and she was saying that they have actually. It's been a very tense time working at the company because every day they wait for directives and they're trying to read what the government is saying. And, the People's Daily published on their social media, they said, this is an example of the digital village. Isn't this great? And that was an indication to the company that, okay, we can let this run. And if you see what happened with the app, it took 4 days for them to put a translation functionality into the app itself. And apparently they had the translation functionality on day two, but they were waiting to see, is this something that might be permitted? And once they had this directive, okay, or not even a directive, once they had this indication, okay, digital village, okay, this is positive. All right, let's go translation. And so they're constantly having to test to see what will happen. But we don't know, right? There's also this government fear of, foreign interference. And so it might be the case that if American users start posting images that are censored or trying to, ask too many questions about sensitive topics like Tibet, that they might have to pull back the access. So, we wait to see.
Right. Great point. And also brings us to the big question. So TikTok is now back online, at least temporarily. Will these RedNote users stick around? Or do you think it's just a fleeting yet sensitive or fascinating moment in in our internet history?
I don't want to be horribly cynical here, but I think unless US users find, unless the big users, right, the ones with the massive followings, unless they find a way to monetize their time on RedNote, they're just going to go back to TikTok, or they're going to go to YouTube or Instagram if the TikTok ban does eventually come in. Social media, we like to think of it as this, beautiful connective space, but today it is heavily monetized. So people are going to follow the money.
Fair point. So maybe RedNote is just like a rebound relationship, right? So it's fun, exciting when TikTok was down, but not something people will stick with in the long term. Before we wrap our conversation today, I've been thinking about one question. How does China, a country known for tightly controlled internet, produce apps like TikTok and RedNote, which are globally loved? What's your take on that?
I mean, as you and I both know, when you live in China, the Chinese internet is incredible for Chinese users. Many of the apps there, especially Weixin, WeChat, they're just unparalleled in terms of convenience and usability. It is remarkable. Like when you're in China, the Chinese internet really works for Chinese users. And if it wasn't for the controls, I think more Chinese apps would be household names worldwide. At one point in the 2010s, five of the world's 10 largest internet companies, measured by market cap, were Chinese. And today it's only Tencent, the creator of WeChat, which is the only one standing amongst them. So, the controls do really hamper, China's international footprint in this space.
It's almost like this paradox. China's restrictions force its tech companies to innovate within limits, creating, those user-friendly platforms because of fierce domestic competition. And they've really mastered the art of algorithms that keep people hooked. It's interesting, it's fascinating, maybe something we should delve into in the future episode of China Remix. Before we go, any concluding thoughts, Barkley?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have predicted this, a week ago, right? So I think what this saga tells us more than anything is that as politics get stranger, so too will be the way that society reacts. So whatever is coming next, it's going to be weird.
Right, it's one way to put it. And frankly, I agree. I mean, I'm surprised by how many surprises or black swan events we've seen in the first month of 2025 when it comes to US-China interactions, right? Trump's U-turn on TikTok ban, the sudden red note craze we talk about today. And let's not forget DeepSeek making moves today in the stock market. It feels like every week there's something unexpected shifting the dynamic between US and China relations. Well, all right, that is it for today's episode of China Remix. Thank you so much, Barkley, for unpacking this with me. Always a blast to talk to you. And thanks for tuning in, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next time on China Remix.